Hey everybody, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse, and you're watching Disruptive Investing News.
So let's talk about Rivian. The stock price is around its all-time low.
Yeah, it's lost 87% since its IPO. And now this story comes out about top executives leaving the company from Wall Street Journal.
So in it, they talk about 4 people. Randy Frank was the vice president of body and interior engineering. And I want to stop there for a second. A lot of the problems with the Rivian right now, since we own one, has to do with the body and the interior engineering. I don't know exactly what he was in charge of, but like if he was in charge of things like the tonneau cover, and now maybe that's exterior, I don't know.
And maybe the frunk, but it includes body.
Well, and let's talk about the frunk for a second. If you go in the forums, the big problem right now with the frunk is that there's some kind of problem with the motor. If it's coming down and something gets misaligned, it won't lock. And if it won't lock, you can't drive it more than 20 miles an hour because then the hood could flip up. So there's a lot of people just all of a sudden leaving grandma's house and then they can't get their frunk to go down and then they can't drive home.
Or they can drive home, but they can only go 20 miles an hour, which is
Where
great,
are you now, honey?
Great for efficiency, but not so good in terms of getting anywhere.
Next is Steve Goronsky, the vice president in charge of parts purchasing. That's important. Supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. So he's gone. Patrick Hunt, a senior director in the strategy team, and Rivian's general counsel or lawyer, Neil Citron.
Now, if you read the article, not all of them left at the same time. Citron, again, general counsel, left in September. He had been there about 4.5 years. Goronsky left in November. He had stayed for about 5 years. Rick Hunt, strategy guy, had been there 8 years, and Randy Frank had been there 4. So not necessarily spring chickens, but they didn't all leave at the same time, which is kind of what the headline makes it sound like.
I would guess a lot of this has to do with stock options. So if you're not really into this kind of thing, you may not know, but there's usually a vesting period. You have to be at a company usually around 4 years before you get all your options. Funny. So all those numbers seem to indicate that they were there long enough to get their stock options.
Right. And then, your pay doesn't necessarily go up after your stock options, after there's no more stock options for you to secure. So there is an incentive for you to leave at that point. Not really an incentive that the company wanted to have, but they wanted to keep you on for long enough that you're going to be valuable.
And there was a quote from a spokesperson at Rivian basically saying that if they wanted to achieve, continual growth, they had to basically leave these people behind. It sounds like a lot of these people were pushed out. I don't know which is true, if they left on their own accord or not, but that's the kind of the feeling that I get. And it's perfectly normal, I want to point out, to have people leave. It's a big corporation. People are going to be coming and going all the time. This happened to Tesla a lot, where the story was, Tesla loses top executive. Has it affected Tesla? No. So how do we read into this? Is this just smoke?
I don't know, right? Because you have to look at all of this in context. And I mean, you have to look at Tesla. For example, there were some times where Tesla was having trouble with production, and then somebody would leave Tesla and it would be like, is it related? Again, with Tesla, it never seemed to make that big a difference, or at least in the long term, it didn't make that big a difference. But you do have to start to ask that question here when you have a company that did really, really bad production numbers. I just have to say, again, yes, they lowered their their targets, and then they barely missed them. And so everyone was like, well, they almost hit their targets. And it's like, no, their targets were double that. And then they missed their smaller targets, which are half of that. So that's the thing that really bugs me about their, production figures.
And what I want to talk about, you might accuse us of actually doing what we say you shouldn't do. But on this story, we're talking about a news story that came out about a company. And you have to be careful which news stories you actually focus on and which ones you don't. I actually think this is one of those stories that we don't have enough information to know about. And yet it can really misguide you. Because you read the headline, it sounds scary, and you're like, I should dump my stock. This means everyone's jumping ship. We just don't know. What you should be looking at are things like Jesse just talked about. Did they hit their guidance? And was the guidance real guidance? Mm-hmm. And then you should be looking at the quality of the vehicles. We have the vehicle, so we get firsthand account of what goes on with the vehicle. But also we dive into like the Rivian forums and we hear about other people. And so far, with 25,000 R1Ts out on the road and a few R1Ss, we're not hearing stellar things about the quality, especially when you consider that some of the key features, like I would say that the automated tonneau cover was a big feature, something that most other trucks I've never heard of have. And then basically they're ripping it off the new trucks because it's failing. And when we look at Sandy Munro's coverage of how they made it, I think even a new engineer would say that's fine for like a prototype, but not for a final version. And it looks like the kind of thing where, okay, well, if they're in a rush, sure. But we've seen the R1T on TV shows for years, for instance, that we know they've been testing it.
This is the thing that really, really bugs me, right? They have been working on the R1T for years and years and years. For example, like you mentioned, the Long Way Up features Rivians in it, right? So they were driving up from the most southern point of Chile all the way up to LA. And it seemed like there was no problem. Now, if you know anything about the show, they had all sorts of other support trucks to have this support vehicle of, the electric motorcycles be able to make it with them. So big diesel generators and that kind of thing. I'm not going to
And look,
knock
this
them
is
on
one of the
that,
problems with investing in a stock. It's a lot like what Peter Lynch used to say. He used to say, know your product before you invest in a stock. Because if you don't, you're just relying on like what other people are saying and you have no firsthand knowledge. So if you really know this product well by watching the TV shows, by having one yourself, by reading the Rivian forums and so forth, then you really know, is this a really high quality product? And what I've been able to take away from this, having owned Teslas and other electric vehicles, I just don't think Rivian's engineers are top notch compared to the high bar of Tesla. Not to say that it's not a good looking vehicle. I think the looks actually is the biggest factor in people wanting this truck. I got to be honest. It's a powerful truck. It is fun to drive. But look, end of the day, if it's going to have quality issues, if you're going to have to worry about that your tonneau cover is not going to work, now that your frunk might not work, that other parts of the car, like it's been bricked for us a couple times, you're going to lose faith in it. I honestly don't feel like taking that truck right now when we're like, hey, which thing should we take to the shopping market? Not the Rivian, I think to myself, because I don't want to get stuck.
A lot of times we're going to take Sparky, a car that came out in 2016.
Because it's more reliable.
It has a better charging infrastructure. Maybe the range isn't quite as good, but the autopilot is still better on a car that's how old? 8 years old?
Yeah. And I mean, the other day we were going to take the Rivian out to do a range test in the cold versus the Ford, and it wouldn't start.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here is not that you can't call Rivian and maybe get them to come fix it, but like this, if this is your vehicle, you can't.
Right.
What? Hello? Like, look, I understand if it's your third or fourth vehicle. Oh, well, we'll just take another one. But look, if this is your everyday driver, you can't afford to not have it work. And so I want to go back to the stock price. Until they figure this stuff out, I don't know that this isn't really where the stock price should be, which is down in the bottom here. And I think that if you're looking at it like, oh, is this a good time to buy? I still don't know. I've said this before. I still think they're an overvalued company at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that they have so much cash, but they are burning through the cash.
Right.
They don't seem to have any hope of pulling themselves out of this.
I think that their EDV, their electric delivery van, is their big chance. I think them pivoting over to the R1X, which is going to be their super luxury SUV model, was actually a dumb idea. I think the R2 is what they should be focused on, which was going to be their cheaper, we don't know what it looks like, model. But yeah, if you're going super luxury now with all these people who bought the trucks going like, not really happy with the quality, you haven't really built up your luxury brand.
I mean, they could have hit a home run, right? They were pitched this really easy softball. There's no other EV trucks on the market. They have all this cool stuff that they could come out with, like the camp kitchen and the tent and stuff like that. And they completely whiffed it. Completely.
Well, and lastly, if you have the IRA, which passes the new tax credit for $7,500, and practically none of your vehicles are available for that, why not go to the R2, which would then get you that tax credit? Instead, they went the opposite direction. I think they're going to pay for that decision. I think that was really dumb.
I think that they're at a fork in the road, and they could either go for higher volume, lower price, or they can go for lower volume, higher price.
No, and that you're right. I think they're stuck.
And that looks way easier to them. They go, oh, well, if we just hand build the cars, then the expectation is that we aren't going to build that many.
Right.
And so everyone's going to be happy when we come out with anything. And then hopefully the cars will have fewer problems because they'll be hand built. And then everyone's going to think that we're going to have a great brand.
No, I think you pointed to it. I think that they're having production problems, and so they can't really go in the high volume way.
Right. And I mean, we know that production is always some of the hardest parts. Tesla goes through this trouble, right? We're seeing it right now at Giga Texas and Giga Berlin. They're ramping up production. It's not that big a deal because we're kind of used to ramps, and Tesla is actually getting really good at it. And they have a lot of, stuff that's already there. When Tesla was ramping up the Model 3, there was no other factories producing hundreds of thousands of Model 3s. So Tesla really has a lot of
experience,
but also a lot of heat taken off of them because they're already doing well at these other factories. And then these new factories, they're not in the limelight quite as much.
Well, and they're ramping up at the rate you expect them to.
Yes.
So, yeah. So just, leaving it with that.
Yeah, I don't think that it matters that the executives left, but there's a lot of other problems with the company.
Right. We're going to be interviewing a lot of smart, disruptive people on this channel. If you don't want to miss those interviews, hit the bell button notification down there. It'll remind you when something new comes out. And don't forget to subscribe. That helps our whole channel when we're reaching out to companies to get more interviews for you. We hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week on Disruptive Investing.